Hi, I'm Brandon or Bevins from the CEDH Budget Brews channel and Discord. Today I'm here with Tim.
Hey,
Thank you for joining me, Tim.
you're
Today we're
welcome,
going
man.
to talk about two mana value interaction under $5. We're going to go ahead and start in white, which is, I'm sure most of you are aware of, Disenchant, which is a 2-drop instant that says destroy target artifact or enchantment. It's extremely versatile. It's really easy to slot in, considering that most people have artifacts or enchantments in their deck. I don't think I've ever seen a deck that doesn't have one or the other, at least. So it's pretty, not mandatory, but it's pretty versatile. Moving on to Heliod's Intervention, which is X and 2 white that says choose instant that says choose one, destroy target X artifacts and or enchantments, or target player gains twice X life. So it's almost like Disenchant, but a little bit better because you can destroy multiple artifacts and enchantments, or you can gain the life, which honestly really isn't that important in Commander. But if you need it for, I don't know, a spell or something, then sure. Moving on to Kabir Takedown, a 2-drop instant, deals damage equal to the number of creatures you control to target creature or planeswalker. So this is really good in decks like Winota or Mono White Weenies, as you could essentially kill people's commanders or problematic planeswalkers like Narset, not Najila. And one of the better things is that if you could transform it in a pinch for a land. Enters tapped, but if you really need that extra land, then you have it. Moving on to Mandate of Peace, also 2-drop instant. Cast this spell only during combat. Your opponents cannot cast spells this turn, and it immediately ends the combat phase. When your opponents are trying to interact with things during your combat step and you really need to protect them, you could cast this. It's like a miniature silence because it also protects the rest of your turn, your main phase 2 and stuff. You could cast this on the stack, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Timmy, but it does remove all attackers, blockers from combat, and exile all spells and abilities from the stack, including this spell. So if they're trying to, destroy, this is why I said Najila, or your Najila, when you're trying to combo off, you could cast this to stop them from destroying your stuff, essentially.
Yeah. So one thing of note with this is that not only can you cast it during your combat, you can cast it on your opponent's combat as well. So it's good at, like you said, stopping Najila. It can cut off Tymna draws. It can shut Armix off from killing all your stuff, like killing like an important creature on your board as well. And then it locks them out of being able to do like a post combat shenanigans or win attempt.
Moving on to Winds of Abandon, our first sorcery of the list. It says exile target creature you don't control. For each creature exiled this way, its controller searches the library for a basic land. Those players put those cards onto the battlefield tap, and then shuffle their libraries. And Overload, change target creature to every creature you don't control. What makes this card really good is that it could potentially get rid of essentially all of your opponent's scary things. So if they have things such as Praetors, or if they have really scary, Bramble Laughs, that vanilla green creature, anything that you could potentially be terrified of, you could cast this for its overload cost of 6 and wipe the board. Yeah, your opponents are going to get a bunch of lands from it, but I would much rather they have lands than an outlet or a win condition.
So, I mean, it's really good at like removing like Collector Oofs, Op Agents, Dante Voidwalkers, stuff like that, clearing all those haters out of the way. But also, like, most CDH decks aren't playing a lot. Like, they're going to have more creatures on board than they have basics. Like, you might...
And they also don't run a lot of basics in their deck to begin with.
No, so you might kill off 5 creatures, like, in a creature-heavy meta. But you might only get 2 or 3 basics. They might only get, collectively, 2 or 3, maybe even, like... I would say it's probably like a 3-to-1 ratio. Like for every creature this kills, they probably get like 1 basic out of it on average. Just
yeah.
When I'm eyeballing it, I didn't do math, but
I mean, unless all of your opponents are playing monocolored decks, you're right.
Well, even monocolored decks run a lot of non-basics.
Moving on to blue, we're starting with Blink of an Eye, which is return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. If this spell was kicked, draw a card. So you could pay an additional 2 to kick it. And it would essentially be return target permanent, bounce a permanent to the hand, and draw a card. Typically, you would only use that in a pinch. Most people that I play with, even at like the lower end of the power level or power spectrum, still only pay the 2 because they don't care about drawing that card when they're in a pinch.
Most of the time that I use it for the kicker is either A, when I'm really hard up, or B, on decks with scepters. Because I'll use the extra, because I have the mana, and now I just need to leverage it into card draw. Like, so I'll put it on my second scepter to like draw a bunch of cards with.
Yeah. I didn't even think about that from keeping it a stack with you. Moving on to Delay, which is one of the best counter spells in my opinion, and one of my favorites on this list. It says counter target spell. If it's countered this way, exile it with 3 time counters on it instead of putting it into the graveyard. If it doesn't have suspend, it gains suspend. What makes this really good is the fact that it, on top of it targeting creatures unlike negate, which is the closest thing to it in my opinion, it also keeps it exiled for 3 turns, which is a long time in game terms. But also, if you're playing against someone who has graveyard shenanigans and stuff like that, this kind of stops that on the right creatures or things. So it's all around just stronger. And the fact that it only costs like $1 more than the gate, I think you should definitely pick it up.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of times the exile clause really screws up deck's timing. Like, a lot of decks will set up to cast like a Dockside or a Naws or a Breach or an Oracle. And by you delaying it for 3 turns, you have just like literally screwed up a bunch of prep. So even when that spell does go to resolve, either their life's low, they haven't been able to, like maybe they tapped a bunch of their like mana vaults that don't untap to cast the Naws or whatever, and in anticipation of going off that turn, like just things like that.
I agree. Moving on to Mana Leak, which is another good counter spell. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 3. Typically, even if they do pay that 3, you've delayed them enough or you've cost them enough resources that they're not going to be able to continue their turn to the extent that they want. Or if it's like their last 3, then they stop altogether and they can't really do much. Typically, this card is really good in decks that more heavy in counter spells.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very versatile card, is what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. Moving on to Resculpt, which is honestly a strong card. Exile target artifact or creature. Its controller gets a 4/4 blue and red elemental creature token. So one of the best parts is the first word, exile. The fact that a lot of higher level decks or even some mid-level decks in black can recur a bunch of their stuff, even if you counter it or if you destroy it and stuff like that. Exiling it can stop a lot of game plans, especially in decks like Gitrog or in
Crick.
Zombies, stuff like that, Keurig. The fact that you get to give them a 4/4 in place of the 1/3 that was going to win them the game, they're going to be molding, and that's a fact.
Yeah. I mean, a 4/4 is not inconsequential. The fact that, like, exiling somebody's Dockside or exiling somebody's
Dranith,
or exiling their scepter or their top. Yeah, so it's like, but like getting rid of like op agents or just combo piece, like Emil Dockside, like getting rid of those things are really good and stuff like that.
Absolutely. It's a strong card. Like there's no falsities about that.
Well, it's 20 cents too. That's the best part.
Is it 20 cents? Oh, it is. I need to pick me up a few. I remember when they were like $2 when they first came out.
Yeah.
Moving on to black, we got Damn, which is 2 black pips. Which is 2 black pips. It says destroy target creature. Creature destroyed this way cannot be regenerated. Or overload for 2 generic and 2 white. You may destroy every creature. And anyways, it's a board wipe that could potentially scale, right? It would be from 1 creature for 2 mana to up to 4 mana and every creature. I mean, you know how good Wrath of God is.
I mean, Wrath of God is really good, but how about a targeted removal spell that you can also turn into a Wrath of God?
Yeah,
seems
exactly.
Like all upside.
All upside with none of the wrath.
Exactly.
Moving on to Feed the Swarm. It says destroy target creature or enchantment an opponent controls you lose life equal to that permanent converted mana cost. So there's a couple of things about this. You losing that life is pretty inconsequential for the most part, because typically it's going to be, like up to 4 life. That's not really important. And on top of that, the fact that you get to destroy a creature or enchantment makes it really, really good, because you can destroy their Underworld Breach.
You can't. No, you can't, because it's a sorcery.
Oh, that's right. It's sorceries. But you know what?
But this is one of the
forget about
few.
Underworld Breach.
But this is one of the few enchantment, or this is one of the few like enchantment removal pieces that you can play in Rakdos and in Mono Black.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that, and typically what you're going to hit with this, at least in CDH, is going to be Rule of Laws. And Mono Black, especially Storm decks, have a hard time. Rakdos and Mono Black Storm decks have a hard time dealing with Rule of Laws that are not creatures. So that's your, like, obviously your Rule of Law, sometimes Arcane Laboratory, and why am I drawing a blank on the one drop?
I know Rest in Peace. Or you're thinking of Deafening Silence.
Deafening Silence, Rest in Peace is another one, yep.
Moving on to Mire the Misery. It says each opponent sacks a creature or enchantment. So the fact that most people are going to have at least one creature or at least one enchantment on field is really good. And especially if they're both powerhouses on their field, they kind of have to choose which one is going to be better for them. And then hopefully at that point, you still have a piece of removal for the other one that they don't just get rid of.
So, and I personally find Mire and Misery not effective against like stacks decks, like Rule of Law style decks, but more against like Crixus decks or Sultai that tend to want to have like onboard value engines like Sylvan Library, Rhystic Study, Crom. So what a lot of times what'll happen is like a Crixus deck will have a Crom on board and then like a Mystic Remora. So they'll have like redundant card draw. And then you can play this and they have to choose between one of them. And then the fact that it hits all of your opponents makes it like a 3-for-1. It makes it a 3-for-1.
It's really good for 2 mana. It's very efficient. And the fact that it's in black, mono black specifically, means that every deck in black kind of wants something like this. I'm not going to lie. Black is on, the mid range of colors, so it needs a little bit of help where it can get it.
Yeah, especially in low color black, yeah.
Moving on to red, we're talking about a Braid, which is probably one of the most played red spells in Magic and Commander specifically right now. It says choose one. It deals 3 damage to a creature or destroy target artifact. Typically, I've only ever used this to destroy an artifact, because dealing the 3 damage to creatures, although good in some cases, typically the artifacts are giving me more of an issue. What about you, Tim?
I generally tend to kill hate bears with it. Dranith, Op Agent, Dothies, even Mind Sensors. For the most part, kill people's Tymna so they don't get their draws. Kill Brassios. I do tend to hit a lot of Null Rods. Like, most importantly, Grafdigger's Cages. Typically, I'm actually using it for the other mode most of the time. Because most of the artifacts I see for them, like, the vast majority of the time, not always, tend to be throwaway artifacts. So mostly like mana rocks. Like, I'm not going to blow up somebody's... Well, I might, but generally I'm not. Like, mostly I want to kill their hate bears.
2 different points of view, and they're both valid.
Yeah, 2 different metas give you 2 different results. Like, but that's why this card is useful. Because of its flexibility.
Exactly. Alrighty, moving on to Burnout. It's an instant, not an interrupt, and it says counter target instant if it's blue, and draw a card at the beginning of the next upkeep. So this is more of a secret tech card. Not a lot of people play it that I've encountered, and whenever I do show it to someone, they think it's a great card because of the delayed draw trigger and the fact that you can target an instant with it, even if it's not blue, and it won't counter it, but you still get that delayed draw trigger, and you would want to use it if you want to like increase somebody else's storm count if they're playing things like, what's that storm counter? Flusterstorm. Thank you. And things like that. So I think that it's a really solid card in red. Red doesn't have as many red doesn't have as many counters. You know, they have red elemental blast and pyroblast, but those are a little bit pricier in terms of what we're aiming for. And then, of course, they're more common. They're more commonly seen, commonly known. Same with Tibalt's Trickery. It's kind of out there and everyone knows about it and everyone's aware of it. Moving on to Cathartic Pyre. It says choose one, deal 3 damage to target creature or your planeswalker. Discard up to 2 cards, then draw that many cards. So it's kind of similar to a Braid in that you can deal damage to a creature or a planeswalker, which is where it differs. And then you can potentially draw up to 2 cards with it. It's very useful if your hand is full or not, and you kind of really need those draws. Or if someone has a problematic creature or planeswalker on field, you can kind of ping them for 3, which I think is really important.
Yeah, I mean, it kills a lot of the common CDH planeswalkers. Like Tavesh, if they minus it to like draw cards, if they Narset with 1 activation, it gets murked, you know, so.
Flame Scroll Celebrant. This card is fun. It's great. It says whenever an opponent activates an ability that isn't a mana ability, it deals 1 damage to that player. And then you could pay 1 in a red. It gets +2/+0 until end of turn. And it also has a transform, which is Revel in Silence, 2 white. Your opponents can't cast spells or activate planeswalkers or loyalty abilities this turns, and exile this. So let's start with Flame Scroll Celebrant. The fact that your opponents are consistently going to be activating abilities that aren't mana abilities, that kind of deters them from casting or from activating things like Hullbreaker Horror or their Isochron Scepters, things like that, or their commanders, because a lot of commanders have a lot of abilities that aren't mana abilities. So that kind of deters them from going infinite or even activating it more than a couple of times a turn if they need to.
Right. It also makes fetch lands cost, like, deal double damage. So what's nice about this as a hate bear is that, especially if decks are on Nas, a lot of decks do leverage their life total anyway, but decks that are particularly trying to leverage Nas, or this incremental damage will just start kind of chipping away at them a little bit more. Like, I mean, this makes a fetch land into a shot cost 4 instead of 3.
Yikes!
Yeah,
Yeah.
Like, it's not a lot, but it'll help it add up. But to be honest, I mostly play it for the backside. Like,
I was actually just going to get, if my Mox field would stop, I was actually just going to get that Revel in Silence. The fact that it's a silence effect is extremely good, and you can't activate Planeswalker's loyalty abilities this turn, or your opponents can't. So you could cast this on an opponent's turn if you know or you think they're going to win. You can just cast it, and it essentially shuts down everything that they're going to do. Yeah, and the fact that it is 15 cents as opposed to Silence is what, $5 now, $6 now?
Yeah. I mean, I would still play for Silence, but yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
But I would play this as my second copy or my third.
Yeah,
because like as an example, Grand Abolisher is $25. Ranger Captain of EOS just spiked. It's $35 now.
Yikes!
Yeah.
Actual yikes!
Like, before I went to Florida, it was like $15, $12. So now we need some cheap silences to shore up those things.
Grab Flame Scroll Celebrant before she's $8 now.
Well, and the other thing that's nice is most of the time, if you're playing red-white, you're probably playing some amount of green too. A lot of times, like Naya or Sans Blue, and you can get this with like an Eldamri's Call. So it's a silence effect that you can use your creature tutors some of your creature tutors to get. So I mean, I've had situations where I've cast Eldamri's Call to get this to cast the silent side when my opponents are trying to win or something. This is
why Tim has the brain. He's using the communal brain cell currently because I'm not. I wouldn't have thought about that.
You're just we're just rough. We're just roughing it through, man.
All right, let's move on to Pyroclasm. So Pyroclasm says it deals 2 damage to each creature. Why is this good? Well, the fact that 2 damage pretty much gets rid of everybody's dorks and most hate bears, with the exception of, a few stars. If you're going against anybody who's creature heavy, chances are this is going to deal a hard hit to them right across the back.
Mm-hmm.
So I recommend playing it. I personally play it in most of my red decks in case I'm going against a filthy goblin player like myself.
Or
has
mist.
a bunch of 1/1s.
Or mist.
Or mist, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Selesnya players.
Good old Selesnya players.
All right. Now let's move on to green, which is a little light. Kenrith's Transformation. This is a really strong card. I've seen it used in most budget green decks. And it says, when an ETBs draw a card, and enchanted creature loses all abilities, and is a green elk creature with that base power and toughness of 3/3. And it loses all other card types and creature types. So you put this on somebody's really problematic commander, and unless they can sack it, it's staying a 3/3 with no abilities for the rest of the game.
Right. So no Timna
it's
Josh,
really
no
frustrating.
Crom triggers,
Yeah, it's really frustrating to play against, but it's fun to play with.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Now let's talk about Turn the Earth, which is actually where I'm also going to bring up Memory's Journey. So Turn the Earth is a 1-drop instant. Choose up to 3 target cards in graveyards.
Oh, sorry.
The owners shuffle those cards into their decks, and you gain 2 life. And you can flashback it for 2, which is 1 in a green. Whereas Memory's Journey is kind of backwards when it comes to the mana values. Its mana value is 2, 1 in a blue, and you can flashback it for green, and they do essentially the same thing. Except Turn the Earth also gains you that 2 life, but it's not super duper important. It's still essentially a Memory's Journey in green, in mono green at that. So
Right.
if you really need that extra like protection in grave, someone's going to exile your grave, you can just get your combo pieces and stuff and throw them back in the deck. Moving on to our first multicolored of the series, Abrupt Decay, which says the spell cannot be countered. Destroy target non-land permanent with CMC or with mana value 3 or less. So why is this good? It only targets 3 or less. It can't be countered, which is why it's good. The fact that you need something like a deflecting swat or a misdirection to, remove it essentially is extremely, extremely good. And the fact that it can only target mana value permanents 3 or less is really a non-issue, because most of the things, especially when you get into the mid to higher power things, most of the things are going to be 3 or less. I'm facing against a Winota. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, it doesn't hit everything, but it hits enough things that the stuff that you want to hit at instant speed and for it to be uncounterable are generally going to be things that are 3 CMC or less.
Yeah. Now, granted, if they do have a deflecting swat and decide to target your commander, feels bad, but it's still extremely versatile and extremely powerful for what it does.
That's when you put Sadness on the stack, good sir. Sadness.
True. Single tier on stack right now.
Mm-hmm. It resolves.
Resolves.
Maybe that's how people get those little tear tattoos, though. From every time Sadness goes on the stack.
Imagine. Bro, that'd be covering my face if I'm keeping it real with you.
I could see some nerd doing that, and then
every time I put Sadness on the stack, I get a new tattoo. Like,
yeah,
you don't know what it means, dog. You don't know what it means.
Right.
All right. Our second multicolored spell is Dovin's Veto, which also can't be countered, but it says counter target non-creature spell. With the last 2 cards, Abrupt Decay and Dovin's Veto, I would say the biggest part of power is it can't be countered. It extremely limits the amount of interaction that can interact with it. And unless you could either remove it from the stack or misdirection it or deflecting swat it, it's going to resolve. Moving on to Fracture, it says destroy target artifact, enchantment, or planeswalker. So the fact that it hits planeswalkers, in my opinion, is really good because there's a lot of other artifact and enchantment removal. And the fact that it's an Orzhov colored thing, Orzhov colored spell, that does all 3, that can target all 3 is not super common, but it is really efficient and it's really versatile. So depending, you're almost always going to be casting something like this in a game. Alrighty. Moving on to Rip Apart. It says, choose one, deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker, or destroy target artifact or enchantment. So this can target up to 4 things.
Right.
And it's extremely versatile. And the fact that, I mean, it goes back to the fracture argument. You're going to pretty much cast this in every game as soon as you get it in hand, for the most part.
Yeah, it almost always has something valid. It's a Braid with upside at the expense of it being dual colored to cast, but same CMC, and sorcery speed versus instant speed. So that's like your downside. That's your trade-off.
Mm-hmm.
I play it in all my Boros decks.
Yeah, like it's super versatile. I would too, honestly.
Yeah.
Alrighty, now let's talk about Vanishing Verse. Exile target monocolored permanent. And I've heard the argument that this card specifically is not very good because it only targets monocolored permanents. Think about all of the things that we've gone over in our deck techs, and even in here, there are some things that you could get rid of that are extremely important, such as Kenrid's transformation.
Mm-hmm.
Or like an opponent's, like most commanders are one or two colors, right? Most of the spells in people's decks are 1 or 2 colors.
Right.
So the fact that this targets a monocolored permanent, people don't think it's as good as it really is. But if you play test it, you're going to see it carries a lot more weight.
So particularly, I like playing it when I play Esper. Is usually where I'm playing this for the most part. It also hitting monocolored. So as far as hitting commanders, a lot of times there's a big trend with partner pairings right now to do one of the Commander Legends 1-color partners, and then one of the C16 dual command, like Krom and Armex or Arden and Tana. The single colored partner tends to be really important. So it's like Armex is removal. Arden is the way to get around the null rods. It hits Remoras. It hits Rhystic Studies, Smothering Tides, Necropotence, Underworld Breach, Docksides. Like it hits a lot of stuff. And it being like your second or third copy of like a exile effect is kind of nice. I just
heard a lot of people. Yeah, I heard a lot of people bashing it. It's like, dude, you don't realize just how strong this thing really is.
I mean, it's not always perfect. I mean, obviously, I wouldn't run it over, say, Abrupt Decay, Assassin's Trophy if I was in those colors. For me, this is one of those cards like I'm playing when I'm kind of going deep on removal, and I just like I'm trying to hit like specific things.
So let's move on to Warping Whale. Okay. It is a generic and a colorless mandatory. It says choose one, exile target creature or power with target creature with power or toughness 1 or less, counter target sorcery spell, or put a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature token onto the battlefield that has sack this creature, add 1 colorless to your mana pool. So why is this card good? Well, the fact that it exiles a creature with power or toughness 1 is extremely good because there are a lot of creatures that have 1 power or 1 toughness.
Such as Traneth, Aven Mind Sensor, Deathrite Shaman, Bloom Tender.
Yeah. I was actually thinking of the 1/3 ninja.
Eureka?
Not Eureka. The other one that people normally play in Eureka. It's like Naga something. It's in my deck.
Tetsuo, whatever, the one that makes them all unblockable. Yeah, Tetsuko, the one that makes them all unblockable.
Yep, that's what was coming to mind.
This also eats Thrasios.
Does it eat Thrasios? Is he a 1/3?
He's a 1/3. It hits a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it does. It does really hit a lot of stuff. I didn't even really super think about that. And the fact that it can target a sorcery spell makes it pretty good because there are a lot of really powerful sorcery spells that people really try to leverage on their turns. like
Yeah, like
Tutor, stuff like that.
Demonic Tutor, Gamble, Imp Seal.
And last but not least, let's talk about the only land on this list. How do you say this, Tim? Because I mess it up every time.
Ganjo, Seat of the Empire.
Thank you.
And I'm sure I butchered it too.
We're not very good. So it's a land that's tapped for a white, and it says channel 2, which is 2 generic and a white. Discard Iganjo, Seat of the Empire. It deals 4 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. It costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control. So in most decks that run this, it's probably going to only cost 2 to activate. And the fact that it deals 4 damage to target attacking or blocking creature is pretty good because it gets rid of the Nagilas, it gets rid of Tetsukos, it gets rid of Edrix, things like
Winotas, Crom. It kills pretty much every relevant creature in the format that's going to punch you in the face.
That wants to punch you in the face, and you don't want that.
Right.
Yeah. And so this card, I would say, is extremely good to pick up now, especially because it's sub $5. And I could definitely see this going up in price if the format stays relatively the same.
Well, the other thing that's nice, and one of the things that touch on with this, is the fact that it's essentially uncounterable removal because it's an ability. It's not a spell.
Yeah.
This is the only one that's useful that's under $5. So Otowaru, I think I'm saying that correctly, is about $6 and going up. Obviously, everybody knows Boseiju is like 20 and probably not going to stay there forever. So as the supply for these cards dry up over the next year or so, like as like the printing kind of phases out for Neon Dynasty, these are just going to go up. Like look at all the dual face modal cards. You can't find any of them for under $5 now. At least the ones that are relevant. Like Shatterskull Smashing is like 12. The blue one, I can't think of its name. The Seagate Restoration is almost $20.
Yep.
Like even the white one is like 9. The one that makes angels. So
yeah, I definitely think that if you're seeing this now and it's still around this price, you should probably pick it up.
Right.
Thank you all so much for watching. If you have any suggestions or questions, leave them in the comments below. If you enjoyed us and would like to support us, we have a Patreon, which is in the description, as well as our Discord. And that's all for me. Thank you so much for watching.
Bye.
Bye.